Before the video starts, I just want to say that it's a bit of a weird one. It's kind of a vlog, kind of a documentary. It's a vlogumentary, but it's not really because I'm just a guy with my phone and I have to edit the video on my phone, and I was pretty much everything I say is just off the top of my head from books I read or a couple of documentaries I watched like 3 years ago. So I'm just ad-libbing the entire time, and so some of it will be wrong. I've tried to correct the things that I did get wrong, but again, I'm just saying what I remember reading. Most of it's right because I have a pretty good memory, but I also feel that a little vlog on YouTube doesn't really do Rewi justice for a guy who lived 90 years and had such a massive impact in his area of life, I guess. So yeah, it's a mixed bag, but I hope people enjoy it. Hello everyone. This will be the start of my new vlog, but I have been uploading these vlogs and I realized that I haven't really explained what I'm doing. So at the moment I'm in Lanzhou. Lanzhou was historically a trading point on the Silk Road, and current goal is to cross to Europe from China via Central Asia, via the old Silk Road, plus or minus some parts if I go to different areas that are more modern. But the general theme is I'm going to be crossing to Europe via Central Asia. The aim is to not use a plane at all, because I'm an eco-conscious human who's trying to demonstrate that you can travel without destroying the environment. So I haven't used a plane in 5 months since I flew in Malaysia to Langkawi, but now I'm setting myself a pretty tough goal of no flights for the rest of this trip. And the start of it will be here in Lanzhou, which has a New Zealand connection. So I'll start this with a New Zealand connection, and that is right here, Mr. Rewi Alley, a New Zealander that most Kiwis don't know existed. He was the second greatest son of Springfield, Canterbury, New Zealand, after Liam Bragan, born in 1897, and he moved to China in 1927, and he is very important. I would say the most important factor in New Zealand's relationship with China. So he's someone we should know about. I assume when most prime ministers go in and meet Chinese officials and they bring him up, quite a lot of them don't even know who he is, because that's the sort of leadership we have, unless they've been briefed by MFAT. So he ended up based in this area in Gansu province. So over the next couple of days I'll go to the areas that he was in. He lived in a place called Shandan County for about 10 years. So there's a museum there, and basically we'll find out a bit more about him. I found out who he was 2 ways. One, Rachel, my older sister, she came here 18 years ago and she visited his site because Selwyn District Council organises events. Secondly, I just found a book about him and then just read it and found it really interesting. And he is an interesting character, and there's the time frame that he was in China is also an interesting part of Chinese history to learn about, and the fact that he spent 60 years here and it basically became his second home, and he met all of the top Chinese people. I'm talking Mao, Zhou Enlai, and Sun Yat-sen's wife. Sun Yat-sen is celebrated by both Taiwan and China. He was the original leader of the revolution in 1911 when the Qing dynasty collapsed, and is celebrated by both China and Taiwan. So, and Rewi was friends with his wife, so that's such an interesting thing. His name was Sun Yat-sen. I had it right at the start, but I got confused because his wife's name was Song. So that's why I kept saying Sun Yat-sen. It's actually Sun Yat-sen, and you'll be able to see his profile because I'll just do a picture of his Wikipedia page. But yeah, important to both Taiwan and China. And yeah, so we will spend the next couple of days kind of going along a bit of a trail to find out a bit more about him. There's some other characters involved. A guy called George Hogg, who was a British journalist and Rewi's friend. He worked with Rewi in Shandan County. They lived there together, and George unfortunately died at a relatively young age while he was there. Then there's Mr. Bailey, who was Rewi's mentor, and he was he was an Irish American, and he was instrumental in Rewi's sort of thoughts. And another important person in Chinese sort of Western history is a guy called Edgar, who wrote a book called Red Star Over China, which again I've read and would really recommend anyone to read if you want to get sort of a perspective on the Chinese Revolution. He was the first Westerner to go into the communist side, and he met Mao, and there's interviews, and it's just an interesting book and something that you should all kind of read if you want to understand China a bit more. And yeah, so let's get going. So I'll give some background on Rewi and how he ended up here in Shandan. So Rewi was born in 1897 in Springfield, as I said. He was named after Rewi Maniapoto, who is another New Zealander that people should probably know about. He was heavily involved in the land wars with the government, and I've read a good book on that about the Waikato wars, and he was a pretty principled leader in those wars with the government. And he grew up basically around Canterbury because his father was a school principal who moved schools, ending up at Whanganui, which is in Christchurch obviously, and he went to Christchurch Boys. Then the First World War broke out, so his brother went over, and his brother actually died during the Second World War, one of his siblings, and then Rewi went over as well in 1917. So he was wounded in 1917 in the leg, and according to his family it made him impotent, so he couldn't have children after that. Then that was he said his first encounter with the Chinese. While he was fighting there, he saw Chinese coolies, which I'll put up what a coolie is for anyone who doesn't know. Basically slavery essentially, just human mules, and heaps of Chinese and Indians were used as coolies throughout colonization essentially. So he came back to New Zealand after the First World War, and he ended up on a farm in the North Island, that the government basically gave land to return servicemen, and it was on marginal land. Lived there for about 6 years and couldn't really make it work, so he decided to move to China to check out what was happening in China, because he'd heard about the revolution. So then, to give some background on China at this time. So China was in the middle of what would be called now the Century of Humiliation, which started in the 1840s with the Opium Wars, which the British waged on China in order to improve their trade deficit with China. So they basically sold drugs into China to make up for deficits in cash they had, and gold and silver. Then during that time, the Chinese lost heaps made concessions to the lots of international actors, and Shanghai had what was called the International Settlement, and it was concessions made to the British, the French and the Americans, maybe another country, but I'm unsure. And yeah, so 1911 the Chinese had a revolution, and that was the fall of the Qing dynasty, and that was led by Sun Yat-sen. And Sun Yat-sen then passed away shortly after the revolution, and it carried on, so governing. And Sun Yat-sen's vision for China was an independent, sovereign China. And obviously, when you have territories of your country in foreign control, that's not really sovereign. So he would have wanted a free China. He would have wanted Hong Kong back, would have wanted Taiwan back from the Japanese, and Shanghai back to the Chinese as well as Macau. So around the time that Rewi showed up, so the Communist Party had formed in, I think it was 1921, and Rewi showed up in 1927. So the communists and what were called the Kuomintang were working together up to this point, and then in 1927 the Kuomintang decided to purge the communists, and they just mass killings, like killed a lot of people who they just didn't like, and that triggered the Chinese Civil War, which started in 1927 and went until 1949. So that's the environment that Rewi was showing up into when he arrived in Shanghai in 1927. So after he arrived in 1927, you'd be unsure if he realised he was going to spend the next 60 years of his life in China, and it would be the start of probably one of the most important relationships any New Zealander has ever had with China, to the point where this is what they've built to dedicate to him. This is an entire museum in Shandan, and it's really nice. So we're going to go in there and I'll just talk more about Rewi. Let's go. So when Rewi started off in China, he started as a fire officer and a factory inspector. And basically, while he was working as a factory inspector, he saw, and he was living in the international settlement in China, in Shanghai, and he saw pretty much how the Chinese people were treated, which was absolutely terrible. The factories would basically just work children to death and then just throw their bodies out like it was like they were literally just rubbish. I'll put a clip up of him talking about it.
You see, Shanghai was an octopus city. All the back country was reduced to famine, and refugees came in by the million, and they were easily bought and easily sold to factories. Factories could buy a child worker for a few dollars and then work him to death and throw his body into the river or out to the dogs on a heap at night. And they would look quite fat. They would be swell up with beriberi because the rice wouldn't have any vitamin B in it. They would be overworked and long hours and poor sleeping conditions, bugs eating them at night, sleeping on the lofts above the machines. And naturally they would get beriberi, the hearts would swell and the bodies would swell, and then they would die. One particular factory used to get its children mostly from Ningpo. They would come off the boat from Ningpo to the Shanghai wharf and be taken to that factory, and they would never see any other part of Shanghai. They would never be allowed out. They wouldn't know anything about the Bund or the rest of Shanghai at all. And this child was in an advanced stage of beriberi, and I thought I would take him down and they could try out their medicines on him and see how far they would get with it. And he held onto my hand, very grimly, tiny little hand, as we went down. It was a big experience to go in a car and be taken down into the middle of a big city he'd never seen, and go to a hospital, up a lift. He'd never heard of such things. And then go on, and before I left him, he pulled out of his pocket 2 little bulbs that he'd managed to, one green and one red, and he thought these were very, very pretty, and he thought the only thing he had, and he would give them to me. That meant a great deal to him, and of course they meant a great deal to me too. But you know, the waste of human life like that, of good life, the best life in China, was fantastic in those days.
And yeah, he didn't, like a normal person, generally seeing children getting killed or exploited tends to radicalize you a bit and not make you appreciate the people who sort of let that happen and the systems that produce those sorts of situations. So over the course of the next, I think, 8 years, he slowly became a communist. And one of his turning points was when he went in 1929 to Inner Mongolia. And there was a famine going on, and he was working there, and 8 million people at least died in the famine, and you would have never heard about it. There's pretty much like no records on it other than sort of eyewitness people saying that it happened. And he, in 1928, that's when he met Joseph Bailey, which is how he ended up doing the famine relief work in Inner Mongolia, because Joseph Bailey was involved in a lot of that stuff in China. And Joseph Bailey taught him quite a bit, and he worked on Wuhan, yes, that Wuhan, dikes in 1931 or 1932. And over the course of this time, the Chinese Civil War is starting and is kind of going in the background. So there's quite a few people in the international settlements in Shanghai, and he is friends with quite a few of them. And a lot of them also don't really appreciate how sort of the foreign exploitation of China was happening at that time. And that's what I mean when he started slowly becoming a communist. All these people just slowly converted and were radicalized essentially from what they saw and experienced while they were in China. And in 1934, while the Long March was happening, which is also a huge event, they started a secret group, essentially, in China of foreigners who were assisting the Communist Party. So, while he was secretly working for and assisting the communists, he was also working for the Kuomintang, who were the nationalists that the communists were fighting. And that was with industrial projects and relief work, e.g. the work in Wuhan. And he proceeded to set up a cooperative organisation with the assistance of the Kuomintang that was basically worker-owned cooperatives, bringing industry into China, machinists, and introducing manufacturing. And from his account, basically, after a while, the Kuomintang didn't really like the cooperatives because it was worker-controlled, and the Kuomintang were anti-communist, so they didn't really like the idea of these sort of essentially communist organisations, so they kind of went and slowly shut them down. That led to him and a man he'd met there during that time, George Hogg, creating the Bailey Industrial School, which they named after Joseph Bailey, who had died in 1935. So George and Rewi set the school up. They set it up in an original location in Shanxi province before eventually moving it to Shandan, which is where we are, in 1944. So they spent the next 10 years here, essentially. George, unfortunately, died pretty soon after they came here. He died of tetanus. He stubbed his toe and died within 3 days, which is insane to think about, just because they had no medicine. And it makes you feel privileged to live now where that sort of stuff would not happen to us. They really took over as headmaster of the school, and basically they spent the time they built a hospital, they built factories in Shandan and taught the peasants how to read, how to work, and how to be self-sufficient, essentially, while engaging in industrial production. Yeah, and then at the end, because obviously this area was still controlled by the Kuomintang, but the communists were slowly taking over. And then in 1949, the communists took over, and the Kuomintang fled. So Rewi then moved to Beijing. He'd never lived in Beijing. Moved to Beijing in 1953 and moved away from Shandan, and lived there for the rest of his life, basically. He lived through the Cultural Revolution and was friends with all the leaders. He met Mao a few times, but he was mainly friends with Zhou Enlai and even Xi Jinping's dad. He was friends with Xi Jinping, the current president of China's dad, which is an insane connection as well. And he basically spent the rest of his life there, worked as a peace advocate, anti-nuclear, spoke on behalf of New Zealand. He had a kind of, obviously during the Cold War, he had a bit of a tough relationship. It was a bit of up and down with the New Zealand government, depending on who was in power and how anti-communist they were, because he was a communist and we don't like them. So he had trouble getting his passport renewed at points, and if he ever came back to New Zealand, he was basically shadowed by our intelligence services, because he was obviously such a suspect human being. So after he passed away in 1987, he still has, I would say, huge impact on China and New Zealand relations. He's brought up quite often, and as I said, he was friends with Xi Jinping's dad, so Xi Jinping knows who he is. And he is brought up pretty much every time we have a high-level meeting. Brought up to the point where he is considered in China's top 10 most influential foreigners, which again, for a guy from Springfield, is quite an achievement. So that's pretty much all I can rattle off after walking through the museum about Rewi. I mean, they like him, otherwise they wouldn't have built this massive museum for him, where it's just dedicated entirely to his life, which is crazy. I don't even know if we have in New Zealand a museum this big for any New Zealander. Like, I've been to Rutherford's museum and that was definitely not this big. So they love him here. Then we have basically spent 60 years collecting like art, writing poetry, and lots of artifacts, like heaps of artifacts, and so many artifacts that they have a museum of all the artifacts and art he collected while he was here as well. Which again is crazy. Like, the school that him and George Hogg founded is basically the basis for the university that is in Lanzhou. And they say that essentially they started or set up the industrialisation for China's entire petrochemical industry, which again, just for a guy from New Zealand who went over in 1927 just to check out the revolution, is quite crazy to think about. And it's an interesting thing to me, the way that, you wouldn't think that's what's going to happen if you move somewhere, is that all of a sudden you're going to spend 60 years there, play an important role in a revolution in the most populous country on the planet, to the point where in that country they'd build museums about you. But that's what he did, and I think that's real cool, and I don't know why he's not taught about a bit more often in New Zealand, because again, like, he's really well respected in China, but we know nothing about him, basically. Maybe people in Springfield get taught about him, or if you're in some niche class in Canterbury, like, and you do the Selwyn District stuff, but other than that, you wouldn't know who he is. I'd say that's probably also because of the fact that New Zealand's a capitalist country and Rewi was a communist, so obviously talking about a communist positively within our society is a difficult thing. That's why they generally avoid talking about the politics of certain characters in history. It's the same all over the world. Like Kate Shepherd, suffrage movement, socialist, not really talked about, just talks about how she was a suffragette. Same with Einstein, again, a socialist, not talked about. Then we have MLK in the States as well, was Martin Luther King. He was a socialist as well, not talked about. Just heavy focus on very, the minor aspects of what they actually did, rather than an entire where their perspective came from and what their politics were in reality. And again, I think there's probably a bit of an insecurity thing from our governments and the societies we're in, because you don't want to talk positively about the enemy. So instead, we're kind of left in the dark and don't get a full picture on who these people were and what their beliefs were.
It also was rebuilt.
So
The former residence was destroyed by the earthquake in 1954.
Okay.
So we can have a visit here. There become a scenic spot.
Is that statue or was it temporary?
It's called the Plaza for Bailey.
Yeah, okay.
He was rebelling.
Yeah.
And Xi Jinping's father.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. This did sculpture in Bailey School.
Yeah.
Bailey Vocational College. We call it here.
Yeah.
This is a new school.
And
it was built in 2020.
And it's all dedicated to Rewi, basically.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And this is the plot for Bailey. And here is Alice Spirit educational area. Leitai.
Yeah.
Here, this school become a educational base area.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So guys, I've got really lucky, and the people at the museum have just driven me to Rewi Ali's old house, which they've rebuilt, and they built this entire school, as she just said, dedicated to him, basically. Which again, cannot emphasize enough. That is insane when you think about it. For just a guy who showed up in Shanghai, had no idea what was happening. So he lived in here. Well, it was rebuilt, but because it was destroyed in an earthquake, but he lived, this is where he lived while he was in Shandan. And there's the man himself, Xi Jinping, he's been here. So just for proof, I said my oldest sister came here. There's a picture of her, Rachel, in his house. So cool. Come.
Yes.
Does it have the fire underneath?
Yes, you know that.
Yeah, it is.
The typewriter is quite badly.
And they played basketball.
Yeah.
They love basketball.
Not hard.
So guys, this is the entire school that they've built that's basically just dedicated to him. It's a continuation of what he started, which again, it's insane for just a guy who just decided to show up to do that. So we've sweet talked our way into the school. I'm not actually really supposed to be in here, but the guards have let us in. And this is the school. As I said, it's huge. Apparently the site is 1,000 acres. And Pilger from the museum has been very kind to me and is taking me to all of Rewi's sites. And there's the man himself, just right in the middle. So again, big deal when you think about it. We're now at the memorial, which again, they've just opened purely for me, which is really cool. Like I came here earlier and it was closed, and I was a bit sad actually because I had no idea how to get in. But Bailey, the girl at the museum, has basically called ahead and got them to just open it up for me so that I can have a walk around. So this is where George Hogg was buried after he died, and Rewi in his will put for it to be for him as well. So they're buried next to each other. Well, Rewi's ashes are here. He was cremated, but yeah. So they've built this all for him and George, which again is just awesome. Like, it's really cool. That tree there is the seeds came from New Zealand. So there's a bit of home. Yeah, it's quite it's just I don't know, it's awesome. It's better than I expected. Like, I've been planning to come here for a while, and to see it in person and to get this sort of hospitality has also just been really, really awesome, and learning more stuff, which is what I like doing, and the New Zealand connection making me miss home. So it's been a good day. I'm really happy, and yeah, I'll probably talk a bit more when I'm back. Might as well do this while I'm walking. This will be the end of the video. I hope everyone enjoyed learning a bit about a New Zealander most of you have almost certainly never heard of. And I was talking to Bailey, the lady from the museum who took me round, and she was saying she went on a delegation a couple of years ago to New Zealand. So she went to Christchurch and to Selwyn District and to Springfield, and she said everyone she spoke to, no one knew who he was. And I, continuing on a theme, I just think it's kind of embarrassing. He's such a large and important figure in our relationship with China. He did so much during his life, and the fact that he's not taught about, because, and I said it in the video, it is 100% just because of his political beliefs and the fact that he sided with the enemy during the Cold War, means that we miss out on learning so much about what is essentially just a person who contributed a lot. And yeah, I just think it's sad, but it is also what it is. It's how our societies work. And I mean, there's heaps of books you can read on the subject of why we don't learn these things, and I can chuck them up. I'll just chuck up a few of them, but the other key takeaway is very hospitable. They even booked my ride back to my hotel, and it was super cheap, and that was really nice of them. And yeah, if I can say anything, maybe from what people can get from watching me sort of travel around, is, you know, take a bit of an interest in the world. There's lots of interesting things out there, lots of interesting people have done a lot of interesting things, and there's nothing wrong with reading a few books. And you never know, if you read a book and then you're in China in 5 years and that book comes into relevance. So yeah, if I could say anything, just I think it's always a good thing for people to read a bit more and learn a bit about the world we inhabit. And that's my quote of the day. Ciao.
I'm not a missionary. I've always tried to integrate myself with people just in a normal, simple way and work along with them. And in my writing, I just patter along now. I'm no longer young, and I can just go along and write down the things that I see that I think might interest some people, not everybody, but some people, that they might pick up and gain something from. Myself, I have always been a learner, and I will continue being a learner all the way through. Just an ordinary person, an ordinary New Zealand country bumpkin, more or less, and there we are.